Why do you think, from a public health perspective, so many people today seem to be so prone to overweight, obesity, insulin resistance, and ultimately type 2 diabetes?
Food has become too easy to consume and we've become less active. It's kind of an very simple of what goes in must come out, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And we are taking in more garbage and we're not putting out enough. So as you know, from an engineering perspective, that's not how I see things, because I think medicine and nutrition and health are much more art than it is. It's not much more art. It's a combination of art and science. So if you were to just look at it and say, well, if you're eating more than you're burning, then obviously you should be gaining weight. That is most of the time the case. However, what we're seeing now is people are not realizing how much they're actually taking in. So if you look at a lot of the research, people who count their calories notoriously are off by 20 to 30%. So they think they're not eating a lot, but they're actually eating a lot more because foods are more palatable, which makes it much easier to consume, which then they become nutrient depleted because they're just consuming a lot of low nutrient dense food, but very calorie dense food.
Foods with low nutrient density and stark calorie
The ratio is totally off.
Yeah.
You want foods that are lower in calories but higher in nutrient density. So you want more vitamins, more phytonutrients, more prebiotics in your foods, pound for pound or calorie per calorie, whereas the ratio has actually shifted over the past several decades. Not to mention, our food has actually become even less nutrient dense just by the lack of regenerative agriculture that's been going on.
You know, there was this fascinating study that came out. It was a recent study. I don't know if it was, not necessarily over the past handful of months, but maybe 2023, that found that as rates of overweight and obesity continue to soar in this country, I mean, just over the past 50 years alone, obesity rates have tripled. A lot of people like to attribute it to, for example, like a decline in physical activity, but actually we're more active now, I believe, than ever before, if memory serves. This is what this study said, but that we're actually more active than ever before. It's just that our metabolisms have declined over the past century.
Yeah.
And in this study, I mean, there were a few hypotheses that were posited, but one of them was that, and this was fascinating to me, in 1910, 90% plus of the fats that your average human consumed came from animal source foods. 90% of the fats that we ingested came from animals, mostly saturated in nature. Which isn't to say that all animal source fats are saturated. Beef fat is like 50% monounsaturated. But now that proportion is it's less than 15% of the fats that we ingest. The vast majority of fats that your average person today ingests comes from polyunsaturated vegetable oils, seed and vegetable oils.
Yeah, it's become very convenient to incorporate that into our food system. What happens along with that is that not only are we processing the food easier, but we have to replenish what we're taking out. Now, so if you look at some of the fats that are in meats or even animal products, one of them would be CLA. CLA technically is a trans fat, but trans fats have this horrible reputation. And in general, they do when they're processed. But these trans fats actually occur or exist naturally in a lot of animal foods, like in meat or in beef. If you look at a lot of the research on CLA, bodybuilders have been using it for so long. I'm not sure if you're familiar. They used to use it for weight loss. And when I was 16 working in a health food store, and I'm like, these guys are coming in, they're jacked. And I'm like, why are you taking 4 grams of CLA? And I started to research. I'm like, oh, this is a trans fat. And that's when they started labeling trans fats. And it did not make sense to me. So categorizing fats all the same is actually inappropriate, which is where we have to understand how these nutrients exist in nature. And that's where we should really be getting back to of how do we see these things exist and how can we get closer to that rather than separating them and trying to isolate nutrients, and that leads to a whole other issue.
100%. So what would you say, going back to foods that are low in nutrient density, high in calorie density, What would be like the opposite end of what foods would you find at the opposite end of that spectrum? Foods that are high in nutrient density, low in calorie density. The kinds of foods that we might want to prioritize.
Oh, so high nutrient dense, low calorie dense foods. I would say arguably organ meats are probably the most nutrient dense for calorie. Liver, which has been incorporated into many different cultures from the Middle East to Mediterranean. We've actually haven't picked up on it here, but in Europe, they've incorporated those foods. And fruits and vegetables are pretty obvious. You can probably eat a ton of broccoli and not eat too many calories, but get a ton of nutrients from it. The problem is that we can't isolate one single nutrient. And we don't, usually, as I tell my patients, you don't eat vitamin C, you eat oranges that have vitamin C plus thousands of other nutrients. I looked at a research study recently, just trying to learn more about the topic. I think we've identified 10,000 phytonutrients.
Wow.
That's probably not even skimming the surface. Yeah. I mean, imagine 10,000 phytonutrients. How many foods do we know? There's so many fruits that are in the Amazon that we haven't discovered yet. I mean, 10 years ago, everybody was going crazy over acai berry and, oh my God, moringa, right? All these things that were just...
Is acai good for you? I love acai.
I mean, it's a super blueberry. I know you love blueberries. So yeah, you could definitely incorporate it as long as it doesn't become part of like your milkshake, I guess you could say.
Well, it's also that it's hard to find it without added sugar.
Right.
But
yes, that is very true. I've had many people tell me they had an acai bowl and that they were very healthy for having one. And then it was with tons of sugar and additives. I was like, yep.
Yeah, you audit the calories of those babies and they're like
exactly.
Those like acai bowls.
1,000 calories,
easy.
1,000 calories, easy. Now look, there are some people who can tolerate that. I can't. I come from I would say more of an endomorph type of body type. Very easy for me to gain weight. So, back to your point of what we've seen so far is that over the past century, Americans are much heavier now than we ever were. When was the majority of our research and our science done? Usually post-World War II. That's when the science started booming. That's when medicine started booming. We were doing research on relatively to today, healthier people. We have rewritten the book. It's totally new territory. We need to go back and revisit that and understand, what did we study then? How does it apply to the human being of today? Yes, we haven't evolved over 50 to 100 years. That doesn't happen. But our society has gone from pretty simple lifestyle from a nutrition agriculture perspective to something that you can't even notice on the food shelves these days.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.